Good morning, everybody. I'd really like to thank the Academy for the opportunity to come and speak to you today. It's a great honor. And this is really quite a unique project where we're actually looking at a species that was presumed extinct back in early 1980s. And so I'll take you through this story. It's a story of 34 years that will have to be told in 20 minutes, hopefully. I would like to give you a framework of how we work in South Africa. Kirstenbosch Botanic Garden is part of the South African National Botanical Institute, and there are 10 botanic gardens, and Kirstenbosch being the biggest and oldest garden. The other gardens tend to be generalist gardens. They don't have specialist horticulturists working on plant families like Ericaceae, Proteaceae, and so on. So the opportunity for restoration is somewhat limited in the other gardens, also because of numbers of staff. But at Kirstenbosch, we're fortunate to have specialists working on plant families and plant groups, and we will be talking about some of the work that we've been doing there. I'm going to cover the question, why are we conserving threatened plant species in the lowlands around Cape Town? Why not up in the north of South Africa? And what strategy and objectives we were looking at. And then a case study with, really fortunately for us, a flagship species. Where you have a beautiful species, it's a lot easier to promote it. And then where do we go from here? So the global strategy for plant conservation is the foundation stone on which we sort of do our practice, and we embrace the global strategy. However, we needed to adapt it to the South African context, because every country has its own ability to do conservation and resources and so on. And so we met and we devised our own strategy, and you'll notice that there's some changes I'll show later, that our target age is at least 60% of threatened species in ex situ collections and 1% in active reintroduction. The focus for us is Cape Flats Sand fynbos, which is a critically endangered ecosystem. The fundamentals of doing this work is partnerships. You can't do this work on your own. So we work with the Botanical Society, South African National Parks, City of Cape Town, and the work that we were doing included 17 threatened species planted and another 37 planned over the next 5 years. Target 16, we need to look at the other targets, networking with other organizations, with sand parks, creating educational facilities like a restoration trail at Tukai Park where we were doing the restoration, and partnerships with the City of Cape Town. These are very important. So there's a global strategy. We all know what that strategy is. 75% ex situ collections, 20% available for recovery. However, we wrapped our brains around this and we thought, well, we have so many threatened species in South Africa that we needed to actually set a target that we could perhaps reach rather than set a target that we were never going to reach. And in terms of restoration, unfortunately, we brought it down to 1%, but the difference is that in the global strategy, 20% available for recovery. Our strategy says available for recovery with 1% in active restoration or in reintroduction. It's really important because available doesn't mean it's been done. And so to look at South Africa and why we're working down on the flats at Cape Town is because Kirstenbosch is down on the peninsula at the bottom corner, and you can see there that the threatened ecosystems in South Africa, those red areas, are all down in the lowlands around Cape Town and up the belts where the wheat is grown. And so we've decided that Kirstenbosch needed to focus on those areas. This is actually quite frightening to look at. the status of Cape Town's 19 vegetation types. We have a biodiversity crisis in Cape Town. 13 plant species are extinct. This is just the lowlands of Cape Town. 319 species threatened with extinction. This is maybe old data, but there are more now. Only 6 countries worldwide have more threatened plant species than Cape Town. This is just the lowlands around Cape Town. Cape Town lowlands has in the region of 3,800 species in an area 60 by 60 kilometers. So we look now at Cape Flat Sand Fynbos. It's a vegetation type that we're focusing on, and there is a GSPC target of 30% to be preserved. You can see transformed already 89%, remaining 11%. In 2006 it was 20%, so we've lost a lot in this short period of time, and only 2% of this is conserved, and only 1% of that 2% is in any reasonable state of maybe a potential recovery. So now I'm going to focus on a plant that has been my passion for many, many years, Erica verticillata, and the restoration thereof. Hopefully you can see this, the historical distribution, the central green round marks are the herbarium records. It's a narrow endemic, so basically just east of the Table Mountain Massif, you would have this plant maybe a 10 kilometer long by maybe 2-3 kilometer wide strip on the flats of Cape Town. And at the top you'll see of the key there's a bright green spot, and that's where the restoration, I don't think this will mark, there we go, the restoration was taking place at Kenilworth Racecourse, Rondevlei down there, and Tukai Park. Just carry on. These are the old tried and tested methods or reasons for plants going extinct. Urbanization soon after colonialism, the colonialists came into Cape Town, they developed these areas, so it's agriculture, bringing in alien vegetation, draining the wetlands, urban development, flower picking was another thing. These herbarium records were drawn from the Bolus herbarium, and I'd like just to point out 3. 1908 was the last wild collected specimen of Erica verticillata. 1943, there's an ex-situ collection in Kirstenbosch. 1961, Pretoria District cultivated material. So I asked the question, what do you do if in 1980, early 83, you have a plant that is a beautiful species, but it's presumed extinct in the wild? And my answer to you is, whatever you think is extinct in the wild, keep looking. Dion Kotzer was a specialist at that time. He had photocopies of these herbarium records, and he was looking in the local remnant areas around Cape Town, and he couldn't find any plants. But while he was doing that, and he was talking to one of our scholars, David van Vel, who was seconded from Pretoria, David said, we have one of these growing in Protea Park, Pretoria. And nobody would believe him, but material was brought back. It was shown to Dr. Ted Oliver, and taxonomically it was identical to the herbarium sheets. Furthermore, 1990, a second plant was found on the Kirstenbosch estate in a forested a gap in the forests near Kirstenbosch Braille Trail. And we also noticed that there was more than one form. So there's quite a lot of differences in color and density of growth. And this picture, a little bit difficult to see, but you can see that bluish mark going up the middle. That is an area where in the 1920s they created an orchid garden in the honor of Harry Bolus, and they planted ground orchids. But they found that these orchids were burning because they were exposed to the sun. So the records that we found stated that they decided to bring in wet wet-loving Erica species to plant around the orchids. And at the top, and Erica verticillata we know is a wet-loving species. And at the top of that blue line there's a little yellow spot, and that's where that verticillata was found on the Kirstenbosch estate. We found then the only record of the plant having ever been collected for Kirstenbosch was by Louisa Bolus in 1917. No other wild collected ever made, and we assume therefore that that is where it originated from. I have a paper on the table. I can't go into this too long, but there is a lot of other forms that we found. We call them clones, and one of the most significant was from Belvedere Palace Botanic Garden. And this is because we kept on asking around. Ted Oliver told me after many years, oh yes, of course there's one in Vienna. And the historical record is showing that this collection took place between 1786 and 1796 by Boers and Scholl for Franz Ferdinand. And they've kept these collections for 200 years, so it is possible to do this. And the story of how they did that and how they got it through the war was a matter of duplication of collections in Vienna, of all their collections, distribution outside of the Belvedere Botanic Garden and Schönbrunn Garden so that they wouldn't be destroyed, and they were brought back after hostilities ceased. These plants were, because there was no electricity, were taken down into Earthhuis, I think that's the right word, earth houses underground in the winter so they wouldn't freeze. And I carried on in the early 2000s looking for more species, and one from Kew. We identified one from America, and I gave each one a cultivar name along with the botanical garden accession number, but we needed to keep an identity for these different forms just to have a handle on them. And in a paper that I wrote, Flowering Plants of Africa 2013, I had a botanic artist take samples, and she painted them. And each one has a particular name, and each one has a certificate, now a registration certificate. Subsequent to the 8 genetic clones that we've managed to find, 2 more have been discovered in Germany, German nurseryman Helmut Heidel, one that was grown in Dresden and brought to a market garden in East Berlin before Berlin was reunited, and we're working currently on another one that I have just managed to get my hands on. So this keeps happening. We don't seem to be able to get to the end of them. There's a registration certificate. It has the specific measurements and details of each of the different clones. It has a registration number. There's nothing to do with royalties. It's only to do with having some sort of handle on this plant. So the reintroduction process started at Rondevlei in '94, and we didn't really know where to plant because the records would say Cape Colony. It wouldn't say whether the plant was growing in a dry area or wet area. So the plants were planted in a transect, and the ones that survived were in these moist intermediate areas. And the other problem then turned out to be that they didn't produce any seed. And so we introduced a second genetic form because Erica is often self-sterile. And we brought in a second genetic form, and the first seed was produced in April 2003. And there's Rondevlei with myself and Dalton Gibbs who did the work. We provided the plants. Very important picture this. Plants need to grow in communities. So while I've been focusing today and this morning about one species, Erica verticillata, it is not going to work if you try and restore it on its own. So in this picture, there are 3 species of great conservation concern. One extinct in the wild, the Sororia behind the Erica is critically endangered, and the Leucodendron is endangered. But you need nurse plants, community plants, and you need to have your pollinators in there as well. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And the idea is that we restore the plant, but we don't go there and we prune or water or do any horticulture. They have to survive on their own. Fynbos is a fire-driven ecosystem. So at Kenilworth Racecourse, the central area, 42 hectares, It's old vegetation that has been there since 1850, hadn't been burnt since then. We put an ecological fire through there, and then we tried to restore plants. And we found that if we are growing plants in a botanic garden and bringing them down in containers and putting them into a burnt landscape like this, the first summer you have the very strong onshore southeaster winds, exposure to the sun. We lost virtually all these plants. But where we put the plants into areas where there was already a structure of vegetation, there was protection against the desiccating effects of southeast cloud. So we needed to synchronize with the climate, so we did the planting at the beginning of winter to give them time to establish through the winter before the next summer. Reintroduction post-fire was less successful. Nurse plants, very important for survival. This is a very significant time. This is the first man-induced ecological fire at Rondevlei involving this particular plant species, Erica verticillata. You can see the plant being burnt. And this is the post-fire image. And what is really important here is that all the other fynbos plants were destroyed in total. You couldn't see anything. But it seems that the Erica would be burnt, but the framework structure of its dead branches remained. And we believe, this is an ecological study in waiting, we believe that that plant grew in thickets, retained its dead structure, and you can see on the right the seed is now being dropped like pepper down onto the ground. And then the plant would then regenerate underneath. There's a picture, it's a bit difficult because on the right you can see the Erica verticillata seedlings coming through. But there was a problem with that because along with the Ericas coming up, you had a lot of other plants like buffalo grass out-competing the young seedlings. So we need to look at that. We have restoration challenges. I won't go too much into this, but imbalances during recovery is very important. The habitat management thereafter is very, very important. You need to have that. Lack of community support I'm going to discuss with you because it's a big thing we need to focus on, and the cost of the process. So with the restoration, this happened at Tokai, pine plantations, pines removed, area burnt, lots of nutrients dropped into the system, a lot of new growth coming up, and there were animals there, otomus, clay rats, and marsh rats, and they came and they mowed everything down, and there are our poor plants being damaged. What do you do? So what you need to do is you follow the zoologists and the zoo people, and you bring in predators. And we were very specific about the predators. These were snakes that were rescued from the local homes, brought in, and of course we had to keep quiet because the public, there were some interactions between dog walkers and snakes. But we had to do this, and also as the vegetation came back, you started to get raptors coming in, and I think also you had a spike in the population of the otomus, and then it dropped down. Anyway, here's verticillata restored to Tokai Park. One of the problems we found with the restoration, as I mentioned, is this incredible regrowth after fire. And so there's a project going on at Rondevlei where they're reintroducing primary herbivores, the eland, and in fact even before that, hippopotami. And they noticed that these huge animals would go through and they would take out the grasses and sedges, but they would leave the woody plants. So this is sort of an experiment taking place at the moment. This is our biggest challenge. This slide tells you everything. We have a pressure group of people from a privileged society around the Tokai area. These people went and marked these sad faces on these poor pine trees from the plantation that they thought or think are forest. And if you love shade, the shade of Tokai and Cecilia, and want shade trees to be replanted, let your voice be heard. And these people have a lot of money, they have lawyers, And they've changed the name to Parkscape. They want to create a safe, biodiverse, open and shaded urban park in the buffer zones around the Table Mountain National Park. And they have actually won a case to stop the removal of the pine plantations. And the area, Tokai Park, has been handed over to two national parks. And the forestry organization has decided it's uneconomical to harvest pines there. There's pine blight, it's not big enough. But these people went to the law courts and they won their case. So now we have a real problem. This is from their website, this is what they want. You can see all the biodiversity behind the horses there. Nobody talks about if they're going to replant these plants. This is, I'll talk about that now quickly. Tokai and Cecilia Management Framework. This framework was developed with the initiative of the Mayor of Cape Town under pressure from this group. And I need to show you, this is the Tokai Park area. You can see the green bits, and there are parts there. It's very difficult with this slide, but there's parts that they want to bring back. Pine trees, replant pine trees. So the model that was developed without any ecologist involved or any conservation person involved was this. You plant your pine trees, you let the pine trees survive for 30 years, you harvest them, then you burn the area and you let the fynbos recover for 8 years, and then you replant pine trees for the next 30 years, and then you harvest, and then you carry on. As far as I'm concerned, even though this was produced at the University of Cape Town, this is an ecologically unsound process, because any restoration that you do cannot afford disruption like this. So recommendations from my side here, ecological approach rather than just restoring species. We restored a lot of other species along with the Erica verticillata, some seeds, some plants. We need link the species to the restoration of the whole habitat. Good management is really important from the people in charge of that area. Fire and fynbos is necessary. Even within the city is quite difficult, but you need to get permits and you do that. Educate the public and politicians. We've heard this before. Investigate further the role of herbivores, because you saw one lot are destructive and the other lot are possibly beneficial. And Erica has been a very difficult group to do phylogenetic research, but they have now cracked that, and I'm working with Dr. Mike Peary and his team, and we're going to be sequencing those verticillata clones to see whether they're duplicates, etc. And then the other one that I've been talking to Paul about is really important. We need backup collections. I retired in Kirstenbosch at the end of March last year. Since then, there has been no specialist horticulturist working on the Erica collection. And so I've already been called back to help with the problems with things getting lost, mixed labeling and all that type of thing. So backup collections, we're looking at doing that with Belvedere, with Amsterdam and various other places. Appeal to the Botanical Garden fraternity and Paul and his people that we actually do this, because you can't have all your eggs in one basket at Kirstenbosch. It's extremely dangerous. I would like to thank you for your attention.